third one is static variable related. Let's put it in this way. Static variables. So static variables is similarly instance variable, but internal behavior is going to be changed. So here static variables, we are using a keyword static. Usually this static can apply for variables and methods. So these two things we can use this static keyword. If you use this method for variables, those call it a static variable. If you apply this method for method, it's a static method. So those two things we are going to cover as part of static keyword. So the variable, if you see, let's write a program class static variables int a public static void main. So we have one method, that is main method, and the class is static variable. We have initialized int a with the default value. The default value is automatically JVM will give it as a 0 for this one because it is a integer type. Whatever the program, if you see, this is instance variable. So this instance variable, if you apply static at here, so then this int a is changing to static variable. So when you are going to apply this static, that means this can a permanent, like whoever is using this a, they will get the same object. If someone is changing, if you see instance variable at here, when you use initially it is 0, then when you apply instance a, sorry, instance 1 dot a is 200, then this one is accessible within this object level. But static, if you apply the same logic with static keyword at here, when you are trying to replace 0 to 200, then the next object will get 200. The same kind of program, if you run it with the static keyword, so the third instance will get 200, not 0. That means whatever the value it is assigned initially, if it makes some modification with other object, then the actual value will be replaced with the recent modified value. So that behavior will be having static. So this static kind of things will be initializing or loading at the time of class loading time. But this instance variables, right, it will be loading at object creation. Okay, then you can accessible. But static will be at a class loading time. So this behavior, like int a is equal to 10, if you made the change, then it will be reflecting to across. Where we are going to use static usually, it will be a constant. Let's take a constant value. If you want to apply that value across the program or outside of the program, so then we used to apply as a static. So there will be a combination static final. If you apply the final, then you are restricting to that. No one should change this value. But in this case, you are not applying the static final. If you are not applying the final, that means you can able to modify the value, but it's like a constant type. Let's make the object for this one. We will see the behavior. Static variable, static variable, new static variable of. So I have created the object static variable dot a. If I try to print this one, so then my output should be 0 because it's an initialized value is taken care by JVM. So the next object, if I try to do the same thing with the different reference variable. So here 1, I'm just changing static variable 1 dot a is 200. Now this one change it to 200. If I make another object with 2, this is also 2. Usually instance variables will be here having 0, but in this scenario it will be 200. That means the old value, which is 0, was replaced with 200. Then the 200 is applicable at a global level. Whoever is using after that, that value is going to be apply across all the objects. Okay, so let's see that program the same thing out, how the output is going to be. Then we will see the same thing for methods also. Okay, so let's create it. Variables static. So here within the class level, I have to be write int a public static void main out.println a, because it is giving issue. I am in static method, but you are calling as instance variable. Then I could not able to access instance variable in the static method. That is one of the reason it is giving the problem here. Let's change it to static. Now there is no compilation error. If you run it, you will get it as a default value 0 because it's an integer type. It's fine. The next thing is I wanted to be create the object. If you remember one thing here, whatever the static variable you are trying to access it, you was not create the object. If you remember the instance variable, okay, if you try to write this one, I'm not calling with reference. See, it is giving error. So when you're trying to access it directly in the static method, it was giving a problem. That means I was unable to directly access inside the static method. So you should create the object then able to access it. That is the one thing. The difference is here with the static. So there is no object created, simply the static, if you apply directly able to access. And one more thing, the static variables, when you are going to call it, you can call it this way also, variable static dot a. So this is a way also you can call it class name with the variable name, or directly you can call it. You can directly call it because you are in within the class level. So within the class level you are in, that's what you are directly calling this one. When you are going to access this variable outside of the class, then you should write this way, class name followed by variable name. So that is the one of the way of approach you can access static variables outside of the class by using class name with the variable name. So now this value also will be 0. Both, there is no difference, the first one and second one within the class level. The next thing is I'm going to change it. Let's create the object variable static, new variable static, sysout static dot a. Now see the output, this is also be same 0 0. Let's try to copy this one, change it to 1, variable 1. So in between I'm going to change the value 1 dot a is equal to 100. So now this value change it to 100. So now output is 0 0 0 100. If I try to create another object with the 2, you run it, see the output, it's a 100 and again 100. But instance variables, if you see this output, it was 100 and 0. Okay, because it's a initialized 100, then this 100 is applicable within this instance itself. Outside instance was not accessed. But here, if you remember the same thing, if you compare instance and static, whatever you assigned int a is equal to 100, then this will be applicable for other instance also. So that is the difference between instance and static related. So when you change the value, then the same value will be applicable across all the objects. Okay, so that you should keep in mind that. The next thing is methods. When you apply the method to the static, so let's create one of the method. So public void my method. So here my method, I'm just printing this out, my static method. So this is the output I have. So whatever the normal method, this is a non-static method. If you apply a static, so then it will be having a static behavior. So to call this method, usually how you can call it, you make the object, then you're calling the method. So how you can do that? So I have a method object. So this object 3. So this object 3, how you can call it? Variable static 3 dot my method. We usually call it this approach for non-static methods. So if it is non-static method, you are going to call it this approach. But whenever it is the static method, if this kind of behavior is there, then you don't need to be create the object. Okay, so let's remove this one. Okay, let me do one thing. Let's keep it in the same way. So you can directly call it like this. Both are same. So you are in within the class. Okay, within the class with the no object. You have not created any object. Okay, if you remove this static, let's see that it's giving the error. So it is saying non-static method. My method is non-static method. That's what you should not call it inside the static. So to call this method, you need to be create the object. So that is the reason there is no error at line number 20, because you create the object, then you are calling it. Whenever it is a non-static, then you should follow this behavior. If it is the static, let's put it the static here. So then you don't need to be create the object to call this method. You can directly call the method wherever you require within the class level. If outside of the class want to access, let's see, if I want to access this my method in other class, it's a variable class. So here how I can access it? So I can simply access it with the class name dot. So I'm outside of the main method. Okay, let's put it in instead of the main method. So here static, so variable static dot, see here a is accessing and my method accessing and main method you should not call anyway. So my method, if you call it, you can able to access it. The same thing if you try to access instance variables. So variable instance variables instance. So you should import it. I think it is outside of the package. So that is the reason it is giving the issue. See here, it is outside of the package. That is the reason it is not able to access. Let's move this one inside the package. So here variable instance is coming. Now if I try to access it, only main method is accessible, but remaining how about other method? Let's write one method it here. Public void my method one system.out.println I'm in instance class. Okay, so I have my method one. So if I try to access it, this one, see, I could not able to see that because this is not non-static. How I can get this one? I need to make the object first. That means first I need to create the object, new instance. If you see now, I can able to see my method one. So then I can call it. But when you are going to see that static related, you will not create any object. You are directly calling by using class name. If you remove this one, it will again say that I could not able to find what is my method. But here you are able to access it because this is within the class. You don't need to call with the class name. When you are going to try to access outside of the class, you must write class name then followed by method name or variable name. So this is the way you should write it. Okay, I hope you understood the difference between instance related and static related.